we'll dig into some of Jonah, and then we'll go back to worship. And so I grew up in a Christian home. My parents just, probably like 6 miles that direction. And great parents. And I had issues with my dad. My dad's a great guy, but we had issues with each other, and he made me angry. And I basically took that anger and I pretty much drank poison and hoped my dad would die, basically. Like, I let my anger hurt me when it was doing nothing to him, and that led to depression. And I got to this point where I started to hurt myself to deal with this pain, and that led me to having a suicidal mentality, and just darkest place I've ever been. Hope I never go back, don't ever plan on going back. And just reached this point of life and time where life didn't really matter anymore, and it was just, I knew God was real, and I knew that there was this love that God had for us, and there was this freedom that He brought, but I was so far away from that, and had just so many lies in my life where I was in this position. I was still like leading worship at youth group, and so there was just, to me, there was no way that I could bridge that gap between becoming the person everyone thought I already was, and this truth that was there. And I went to a retreat as a freshman or sophomore, and while I was there, God just did miracle after miracle, and just challenged my life and went deep into just this pain. And he really set me free. And it was singing a song by Chris Tomlin where it just said, "Our God is a God who saves. Our God is a God who saves." And while we were singing that, it just hit me, our God is a God who saves, and He pulls us out of this darkness. And so since then, that was 5 years ago. Since then, God set me free and has brought me into just this amazing relationship with Him and this amazing freedom in life. And I feel like I was a lot like Jonah, where early on in my life, God gave me a call and I turned away. So we'll turn to Jonah if anyone has Bibles. It's a 2-page book, and it's such a simple book, but we know how it starts. Chapter 1 is God tells Jonah, go to Nineveh and tell these people about my love and tell them my message. And Jonah goes the opposite direction, gets on a boat, starts sailing away, and a huge storm comes up. And through casting lots, the sailors find out that Jonah is to blame for the storm, and reluctantly they throw him overboard. And the storm is calmed, and Jonah's in the water. And we'll start on verse 17. It says, "And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Then Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the belly of the fish, saying, I called out to the Lord out of my distress, and He answered me. And out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and You heard my voice. For You cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the flood surrounded me. All Your waves and Your billows passed over me. Then I said, I am driven away from Your sight, yet I shall again look upon Your holy temple. The waters closed in over me to take my life. The deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped about my head. At the roots of the mountains I went down to the land, whose bars closed upon me forever. Yet You brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. When my life was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to You into Your holy temple. Those who pay regard to vain idols forsake their hope of steadfast love. But I, with the voice of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to You. What I have vowed I will pay. Salvation belongs to the Lord. And the Lord spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah out upon the dry land. Then the word of the Lord came to Jonah a second time, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it the message that I tell you. And so in there, I just think this prayer is a really cool prayer. And I'd like to look at, there's 4 actions that God did in this passage right here. God spoke to the fish. God answered Jonah's call. God brought Jonah's life out from the pit. And then God spoke to the fish a second time and gave Jonah commands. So I'd like to just dig into those and just see how we can see God's love through those actions. I'm just going to open a prayer to start. God, I pray that You just move in this room right now, God. I pray that I'm nothing, God, and just Your words will just penetrate through me and just into our hearts, God. Just everything good is from You, Lord, so I just pray that You just come and give us a gift now, God, just a deeper understanding of who You are and Your love, God. So just speak to us now and just fill this room. Amen. Amen. So we see in verse 17, God spoke to a great fish. And this has always been one of those verses that just seems crazy. Like, God sent a fish to swallow up a man. And I was researching fish that could actually swallow people, and if they could live. And a lot of people think that it was a sperm whale. Totally random, doesn't really matter what kind of fish it was with the story, but sperm whales can swallow. Like, there was one sperm whale that they caught that had a whole 405-pound squid inside of it. And their stomachs, the way they work is they have two different stomachs where they, like, the first stomach, they swallow things whole, and they use two different stomachs to digest. So it is actually possible that someone could be swallowed by a sperm whale and live through it. And it's crazy to me. But this action from God wasn't an action of punishment. I think a lot of times we see this as Jonah's punishment was he got swallowed by a whale, but I think the fish was actually a blessing from God, because Jonah, his punishment was he was thrown into the water. And as he was in the water, we'll see later, it sounds like he's already cried out to God previous to being in the fish, and then God sent this fish to rescue him, and not sent the fish to punish him. And I think that's something really important that we'll see. And the second action God did was in Jonah, in verse 2, it says, I called out to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me. And I think this distress that he's talking about was, while he was drowning, I think he probably felt two different types of distress. There was one, the physical distress of, I'm in the middle of the ocean with nothing, I'm going to die. And then the other side of it is, I've turned my back on God, and I'm been running away from him, and there's no peace when you turn your back on God and you don't do what God's telling you to do. And I see that in my life. When I reached that dark point, I cried out in distress, and that's when God answered. And he answers when we call out in distress. And we really have to have that willingness to call out when we reach those times of pain, because it's easy to get into distress, and we should crawl back to God and say, God, help me. But sometimes we feel like somehow by crawling back to God, he's going to be disappointed in us, and he's going to look down and be like, you did that again. But our God is not a God who looks down on us and frowns upon us when we come back to him because we messed up. He's a God who already knows what we did, and he's just waiting with open arms to accept us again. And I like that song from The Inside Out, because, you know, it just says, from the inside out, my heart cries out for you. And that's what Jonah was expressing. He had that real, just everything he had, because he was dead physically and he was dead spiritually without God. There was nothing left for him. What else is there? And so then we see in verse 6, it says, I went down to the land whose bars closed upon me forever, yet you brought up my life from the pit. And Jonah had really given up on life. You know, the bars had closed on him forever. There was no hope left. And God came and rescued him out of there. And this is Jonah saying this as he's in the belly of a whale. So he still hasn't even made it to the beach. He still hasn't made it out alive, in one sense. But on the other side, he knows that God's with him, because God, spiritually now, I think he's back praying with God. He's in communication with God. And when you have that, the physical doesn't matter. You know, and so even though he's still somewhere in the middle of the ocean inside of a fish, he's saying, you've already pulled me out of the pit, and you've rescued me. And there's just a new energy and a new love when you've fallen away and you come back to God. And that's where I was after that retreat. Those first couple months when I just recommitted my life to Christ and was finding freedom, there was this new passion and love, and I just saw life in a whole new way. Because to me it was, I'd given up on life and I tried to end my life, and now I'm pursuing God and I have this great relationship with him, and nothing else can stop me. There's no physical earthly thing that can get between that. And he's such a faithful God. And so I think that's one of the main points I think we need to hear today, is that when we're in this point of deep, dark, whatever, cry out to God and he'll rescue you. But it's even on a small level, when if God says, do this thing today, and instead we do this, I had an opportunity this morning to follow God or to not follow God, and I chose the wrong direction. And it was funny because it was right in the middle as I'm studying this thing on Jonah, and I just intentionally walked away. And it was just a stupid little thing, and even in that time, I had to stop and go back to God and just say, God, I failed. And we can keep coming back to Him and keep receiving that freedom from Him, but when we don't come back to Him, we lose that freedom, and there's tension in the relationship. And I think probably my favorite thing of this whole passage is verses 2:10 through 3:2, where Jonah's given a second chance. Sometime after he prayed this prayer, God spoke to the fish, and the fish vomited him up